tonight. There's an app for that. Social media platforms are putting Homeland security at risk. And in the wake of a report revealing atrocities against the Uyghur people in China, college students are taking on the Communist Chinese Party.
Our universities are among its top targets, young people in particular.
Plus, a twin-demic?
Canceling elective surgeries so that you can manage the amount of patients that are being hospitalized.
Doctors worry COVID and the flu could overwhelm hospitals this fall. All this and more on Faith Nation. Cyber threats to the homeland. Welcome to Faith Nation in the Virginia Beach newsroom. I'm Brody Carter. Well, tonight, social media giants are under scrutiny over threats to national security. Major big tech representatives, they were in the hot seat today, facing tough questions from the Homeland Security Committee over faulty security practices. That hearing comes a day after a whistleblower accused Twitter of employing an undercover Chinese spy. CBN News senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener has this story.
Chinese-owned TikTok is among social media companies being criticized over security concerns and potential national security risks. Executives, current and former, are in the hot seat. Senators from both sides of the aisle sounding the alarm.
4,000 engineers at Twitter had access to all of the personal information, user data, geolocations of Twitter users. Is that accurate?
Leading the panel, Senator Gary Peters, who accuses the sites of intentionally sending users dangerous content that may fuel domestic terror.
Unfortunately, because these platforms are designed to push the most engaging posts to more users, they end up amplifying extremist, dangerous, and radicalizing content.
Former executives from Meta Platform Inc.'s Facebook and Twitter warning the committee that YouTube, Twitter, Meta, and TikTok are not addressing potential harm of their platforms, saying the companies prioritize profit over safety.
I lost my trust with the companies of what they were doing and what Meta was doing. I think we should move beyond trust to helping our researchers and journalists understand the platforms better.
This hearing follows bombshell testimony Tuesday, alleging Twitter accounts are not as secure as they should be. A former Twitter security chief told Congress the social media platform is plagued by weak cyber defenses, privacy threats, and the inability to control millions of fake accounts.
They don't know what data they have, where it lives, or where it came from, and so, unsurprisingly, they can't protect it. And this leads to the second problem, which is the employees then have to have too much access to too much data and to too many systems.
Critics also argue that TikTok's Chinese ownership puts U.S. users at risk.
Just imagine, should the Chinese, for example, having tens of millions of Americans' private messages, their location, their IP addresses, their other browsing history. You know, we don't realize that when you open Twitter on your iPhone, for example, Twitter will be able to access data from other applications you use on that phone.
Ex-execs are also calling for transparency, but efforts to regulate the companies have so far stalled in Congress. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Well, social media reps testifying on Congress today pushed back against some of those claims. This is Republicans push for licenses that would allow social media companies to operate in the U.S., providing a means through which to hold them accountable when it comes to issues including privacy and content moderation. Well, charges of human rights abuse in China are no secret. A recent UN report states the Chinese Communist Party's treatment of Uyghur and other minorities could be classified as crimes against humanity. While Washington grapples on a response, a group of college students taking on the CCP getting some big attention. As national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports, their actions are threatening Chinese ties to American universities.
The mission of this student-led network is simple and direct. Remove the influence of the Chinese Communist Party from American college campuses.
The CCP isn't content to have total control over speech and thought in its own territory. It also wants to export the system of government abroad. And our universities are among its top targets. young people in particular.
John Metz, president of the Athena Institute, launched this campaign to educate students on the threat and help free academia from the CCP agenda.
So we're asking universities to do three things. Stop taking money from the CCP and its proxies. Stop investing in companies linked to the worst of the Chinese government's human rights abuses, and disclose any and all financial entanglements with entities in the People's Republic of China.
In 2021, Catholic University of America became the first school to commit to auditing its endowment for links to companies tied to China and its human rights abuses. Since then, Athena chapters have spread to campuses nationwide.
Students have been the ones who've been willing to say, our university shouldn't be taking millions of dollars from a government that's committing genocide at home and seeking to silence free speech here in the U.S.
For years, retired General Robert Spalding has sounded the alarm about China's efforts to expand its system of government internationally. His main point being it's not just academia that needs to break ties.
They have so become a part of our business and financial and academic and political systems that if we don't get the Chinese Communist Party out of the country, that means they cannot have any contact with any university system, any corporation, any financial system, institution, any politician. If we don't decouple, then we end up dying the slow death where we lose touch with our principles and values that are established in the Constitution and slowly begin to lose our democracy.
A recent State Department report found that the CCP specifically targets young people to manipulate public opinion. The strategy being that if you can influence the way the next generation thinks, you can prevent them from taking action. The Athena movement is a sign that that strategy has been blunted, with students already on the front lines of the fight to preserve democracy. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Title IX is set to get an overhaul as the Biden administration redefines biological sex for students in federally funded schools and universities. The administration's plan is to combat discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, and recently opened up those changes to public comment, which logged close to 350,000 responses. However, more than half of those disappeared from the record this weekend in a move the Education Department is calling a clerical error. Joining us to talk about this huge disparity in the numbers and why it matters is Sarah Parshall-Perry. She's a legal expert at the Heritage Foundation. Sarah, thanks for joining us tonight on Faith Nation.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first and foremost, you served in the Department of Education during the Trump administration. You've watched public comments to others' proposed rules. So what's your take on this large, even historic number of comments to this new rule on gender identity?
Well, I think it's telling we haven't heard anything from the Department of Education itself on a very significant disparity that arose between 24 and 36 hours from one day to the next. In a private correspondence with Politico, they indicated it was due to a clerical error on a comment that was not related to the current regulation under Title IX, and that it had resulted in duplication of almost 200,000 comments, which I find suspicious if they're not willing to publicly make an announcement or issue a press release to that effect. But I will say in the end, the regulation received somewhere between 210 and 235,000 comments, which is a historic high for any rulemaking process in any federal agency.
Well, Sarah, we know it's going to take months for administrators to sift through these comments and that there may be legal challenges. What kind of pushback are you expecting?
Well, we've already seen quite a number of lawsuits based on the intersection between Title IX and state sports laws, specifically to protect biological reality. Those challenges have been mounted either under state constitutions or under the federal constitution. But what we're likely to see, depending on the composition of Capitol Hill in both chambers after midterm elections, is potentially a joint resolution to disapprove of the letter. Under the Congressional Review Act, Congress has 60 days to issue a resolution essentially removing the law as if it was never proposed in the first place, which of course the president can veto. But then Capitol Hill, both chambers have an opportunity to override that veto. So it's entirely likely that this will be subject not only to state and federal law challenges, but to a congressional challenge as well.
Some potentially big changes coming on the horizon, Sarah. So what's your advice to parents who don't want these new gender rules in their children's schools?
I would say vote your values in November. Make sure that you are representing people who understand and will advocate for the nation's biological reality, what has always been the harbinger and the standard by which we judge civil rights protections in the country. I would say also be very active in your school boards and in your state boards of education, because those states are beginning to make their own rules on biological reality and have come out in opposition to the proposed Title IX rules, saying that they will not follow regardless of what the administration issues. So I would say to be vigilant and continue to hold fast to the notion of biological reality by being active in your own community and through your own educational avenues.
We're about running out of time here. 30 seconds with this last question here, Sarah. Supporters of the Title IX rule, they say that this change, the new interpretation, will ensure greater equality in employing LGBTQ workers. Is there a positive aspect to these changes?
Well, because those workers are already protected under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, specifically related to employment discrimination, and post Bostock versus Clayton County, the Supreme Court's decision in 2020, the court made very clear that they are to be protected under that federal civil rights law. They do not need a double protection under Title IX, which would upend everything we know about sex separation and equality in public education.
Sarah Parshall-Perry, unfortunately, that's all the time we have with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, coming up, the White House climate push. Biden highlighting electric cars at the Detroit Auto Show. We've got the details coming up. Welcome back. Tonight, the White House is making a major push to fight climate change, announcing $900 million for electric vehicle infrastructure. Today at the 2022 Detroit Auto Show, President Joe Biden, a classic car enthusiast who owns a '67 Corvette, touring American-made hybrid electric and combustion vehicles from Chevy, GM, and Ford at the North American International Auto Show. And the White House touting the massive new climate, tax, and health care law called the Inflation Reduction Act, offering tax incentives for buyers of new electric vehicles.
Now we're choosing to build a better America. An America that's confronting the climate crisis with America's workers leading the way. And we're rebuilding an economy, a clean energy economy, and we're doing it from the bottom up and the middle out.
Well, the president's trip to Michigan comes as Vice President Harris celebrates the new law at a climate event in Buffalo, New York. Well, one delay after another, the Justice Department is accusing former President Trump's lawyers of causing, quote, irreparable harm by delaying the DOJ probe into classified documents seized at Mar-a-Lago. In the latest legal back and forth, the DOJ argues the order to grant a special master by a judge last week as a third-party overseer of those documents effectively halts the investigation. All this as the Justice Department is apparently expanding its investigation into the January 6th Capitol riot. Now, dozens of subpoenas have been issued to aides of the former president. Here with us now is our very own CBN News chief political analyst, David Brody. David, I want to know what you think. Is this search for a special master to independently review those documents irreparable harm, or is the Trump team just doing due diligence before the law?
Well, and it's not just the Trump team doing due diligence. You would think the DOJ would want to see this as a due diligent effort by whoever is out there, whether it be the Trump administration. Listen to me. Where am I? 2017? Whether it be the Trump folks or whoever. Here's the point. What's wrong with going slowly here? I mean, does anybody, liberal, conservative, left or right, does anybody have a problem with the slowness here? I think, if anything, everybody should appreciate this slow go, because we're going down a very, very dangerous road here with the potential indictment of a former president of the United States. So because of that, I think everybody has to do their due diligence here. Everybody has to kind of take it slow. I think ultimately, Brody, this is all about what's in those documents. I think once we find out what's in those documents, and, you know, how big of a deal was what Donald Trump had at Mar-a-Lago? I think once we get that information, if you will, the devil is in the details, then we'll have a lot clearer sense of how serious, obviously, all of this is.
Well, David, I want to shift gears here as the DOJ is also doing so as they expand its investigation into the Capitol riots on January 6. Is this just another boon for Trump supporters to cry witch hunt?
Well, I don't think there's a question about it. For sure, they're going to do that. And they're going to do that anyhow. Let's be honest. I think what's interesting here is that there's some new reporting out by Just the News, justthenews.com, talking about this whistleblower that has come forward from Capitol Hill Police, basically saying that under Nancy Pelosi's watch, they, Democrat leadership at the time, knew all about these threats that were coming on January 6th and did nothing about it. And so, you know, it's not just about the witch hunt that the Trump supporters are talking about. It's also about the actual factual reporting that's going on to suggest why is the January 6th committee not looking into a lot of all of these other documents, all these other whistleblowers that are coming forward. It doesn't seem like it's a fair fight. It seems like it's a one-sided fight. And I think that just gives more oxygen to the the witch hunt complaints.
Well, final question here, David. Senator Graham introducing a bill that would impose a national ban on abortion after 15 weeks. So I want to ask you, as the Biden administration is also touting the Green New Deal to fight climate change, is climate change as well as abortion, are these big winning political issues for Democrats?
Well, the Democrats hope so. Look, on abortion, I think you can make the tangible case that it is affecting the polls to some degree right now before the midterms. Now, does that mean it's going to be a red wave, bold and 72 font compared to a 24 font and a little bit smaller case? I think either way, we're going to see a red wave, but I think abortion could affect that for sure. As for climate change, it's a little bit less unknown. Look, I think Democrats believe that the Gen Z crowd is going to get all fired up about climate change. But the question is, can you get the Gen Z crowd out in the midterm elections? And I think that's where we're going to find out about. So you can make the argument that it's about issues, but ultimately what this is all about is turnout. If you get the turnout, then all of a sudden the issues are important. But the issues aren't as important as the turnout.
David Brody, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Brody.
New concerns over monkeypox in the United States. Today, in a congressional hearing, senators blasted the administration's response, calling it a catastrophic failure. Dr. Anthony Fauci, chief medical advisor to the president, warning the virus could jump from men with same-sex partners to the rest of the population, comparing the monkeypox outbreak to the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Anyone exposed to the circulating virus can get infected with monkeypox, regardless of their age, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Any assumption that it will remain restricted to a particular segment of our society is truly an assumption without a scientific basis.
The CDC says there are now over 21,000 confirmed cases in America, more than anywhere else in the world. Well, America could be facing a twindemic. A harsh flu season coupled with a COVID spike. Health officials are recommending flu shots along with COVID boosters, which should begin rolling out this week. Medical reporter Lori Johnson explains how we can protect ourselves against this double threat.
The U.S. may soon enter an unusually severe flu season, one that starts earlier than most and hits children especially hard. Our flu season generally follows what happens in the southern hemisphere, which is just now finishing its most severe in 5 years. This go-round is characterized by an early onset, which tends to make it worse, and kids aged 5 to 9 had the highest rates of infection, followed by children 4 and under.
So if you look at Australia, for example, they are just completing their winter months as we up in the northern part of the planet start to enter into fall and winter. And so what we gleaned from that is we're able to tell what kind of a flu season awaits us by looking at what happened down there.
Last year, the world saw very little flu, and the year before, almost none at all, possibly due to isolating and masking to avoid COVID. This year, though, more people are resuming pre-pandemic activities.
In the United States, up to 30,000 people die a year from the flu. And they're usually very elderly, people that have underlying medical conditions, or the very young.
Doctors recommend a flu shot, ideally before Halloween, as the best way to avoid the flu or suffering severe complications. It takes full effect after a couple of weeks and lasts about 6 months.
You want to be protected even at the tail end of the flu season, which might be March or April of 2023.
Speaking of vaccines, a new COVID booster is available that's touted to be more effective against the Omicron variants.
All previous evidence with regards to co-vaccinating with the COVID vaccines and influenza vaccines show there was no side effect or no ill effect of doing them both at the same time. So we would assume that that would be the trend that continues with a newer version of a COVID vaccine.
Despite these measures, the U.S. could see a spike in both viruses.
There's always the risk of something along the lines of what's been called a twindemic at times, and that's when a very strong flu season would be paired with a strong, COVID peak during the flu season as well.
In that case, hospitals could become overwhelmed.
A higher amount of ICU bed utilization. There's a lot more folks coming into the emergency departments and overwhelming that. Patients on ventilators, canceling elective surgeries so that you can manage the amount of patients that are being hospitalized.
Ken Starr, the independent counsel whose criminal investigation led to Bill Clinton's impeachment, has died. President Ronald Reagan appointed Starr to the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. He then served as Solicitor General under President George H.W. Bush. In 1994, he was named head of the investigation into the Clintons, Arkansas's business dealings that eventually led to the revelation of the former president's affair with a White House intern and ultimately his impeachment trial. Later in his career, Starr then served as dean of Pepperdine University Law School and president of Baylor University. He had also taught courses at CBN's own Regent University. Starr died in Houston after complications from surgery at the age of 76. His influence in politics in Washington sure live on. Starr also leaves behind his wife and 3 children and a legacy with quite the shoes to fill. Well, that's going to do it for us here at Faith Nation. We'll see you tomorrow.